They read her name last. It came at the bottom of the manifest, smudged at the edge of the clipboard under a thumbprint and a streak of rain. No call sign, no history line, just reassigned. Temporary fill. A tech sergeant squinted at it and gave a half shrug before handing the sheet back to the jumpmaster. "Slaughter and Charlie's trail team," he muttered. "If she can carry a rifle, she can walk." Tess didn't say anything. She was already kneeling beside the cargo pallet, checking her harness clips in silence while the others around her adjusted gear, spat jokes, and tightened sling points with loud, casual force. No one asked her name. One Marine called her "tag along," and another said, without looking up, "Command must be short if they're pulling from the admin bay." The ramp hissed open and the jungle heat hit like a wall, hot, wet, thick enough to coat every breath. They stepped into it without ceremony. The flight line was temporary, propped up between tree stumps and slope, palms bent in the downwash from the rear rotor, and sweat rolled instantly down the backs of every neck. She walked third in file, just behind Corporal Diaz and ahead of two pack carriers still zipping their plate vests. Her boots were caked in the last base's gravel dust, the laces double knotted but not clean. Her rifle sling was too new. It hadn't scuffed yet, and that was all it took. "Look at that grip," someone muttered. "She's never even dropped it." Tess didn't look back. Her eyes scanned the ridgeline, not with fear, not with hesitation, just quiet calibration, distance, angle, elevation. The tree line was thick and low, wet with monsoon runoff and layered in fog. They were supposed to sweep a forward trail and set a temporary camp, holding until the next team leapfrogged into position by boat. Standard recon, light contact expected. The ground turned to mud 20 meters in. They passed a downed branch thick with moss. Tess stepped cleanly over a half-buried shell casing, spent, twisted, already rusting. No one else noticed. The others kept pushing forward through brush. No markers. Just radio pings and the high-pitched chirp of low-range comms crackling against humidity. Corporal Diaz turned back at one point and spoke low to the private behind him. Dead weights walking. At least. Could be worse. Then he pushed a palm forward for silence. It came fast. No thunderclap. Just 3 shots from deep right sharp, cracking, followed by a burst that lit up the foliage like brief lightning. The whole team dropped. Someone shouted to fall back. The tree cover exploded with shouts and return fire. Tess hit the ground low and silent, not with panic, not with flailing limbs. She dropped chest first into the mud, rifle tucked in, chin pressed flat to the earth, leaves scattered, boots thudded around her. 2 Marines crawled left for cover. One dragged another by the harness loop. Shouts carried over the static. The comms burst on and off, filled with call-outs and curse words that barely cut through the noise. No one called for her. One round cracked against a trunk near her shoulder. Bark shattered and fell like dry confetti. Tess didn't move. Her fingers gripped the sling. Her breathing stayed low. She didn't blink. 1 inch to her right, the earth held a root slick with rainwater. She let her cheek rest against it. Smoke rose, faint and wet, curling just above the blast marks in the underbrush. The jungle muffled sound with strange precision. One moment, it was all gunfire and shouts. The next, silence folded in again, broken only by the sharp breath of one wounded man calling weakly from the slope. Someone moved to get him. The others regrouped. Tess stayed where she was, fully prone, half submerged in the churned-up mud where the first burst had hit. She watched the tree line, listened. She didn't need orders. She didn't wait for permission to act. No one asked where she was. She was already exactly where she needed to be. When the call came to shift north and pull back to a fallback marker, the squad moved quickly. 2 were limping. 1 was bleeding light through a wrap at the shoulder. No one looked back toward the depression in the mud where Tess lay. She rose when they were already 30 meters ahead, silent as the leaves above her, and followed their trail through the churn. Her boots didn't splash. Her sling still looked too clean. But her gaze had changed. She never looked at the man who had called her tag-along. She didn't have to. The jungle did not care who had rank or who was wounded. It only pressed in harder with every hour. By the second day, the squad had stopped calling it terrain and started calling it weight. Sweat poured from every neckline, soaked every seam. Boots tore through vines, slipped on stone, and disappeared ankle-deep in mud that never dried. They had regrouped after the ambush, shaken and short on everything. One man had a tourniquet wrapped high on his thigh. Another limped from a twisted knee. There was no medevac, no response. No idea who was alive 2 valleys over. They moved slowly, slipping in and out of cover with hands tight on weapons that no longer felt like tools, just burdens. The air stank of fungus and heat. Comms clicked in and out, static drowning any real signal. No GPS lock, no SAT guidance. Just an old terrain printout from the team leader's vest pocket, now torn at the corners and damp at the edges. Tess stayed third in file. Not assigned, not requested, just settled into the space between Diaz and the wounded private they called Roach. She didn't speak unless she had to. When the sun cleared a patch of canopy and the heat hit with full weight, she stepped off trail without a word, slipped down a bank, and returned 5 minutes later with a full canteen. No one asked where she'd gone. Roach took the water without thanks. Tess just tightened his leg wrap again and kept walking. Every step was a negotiation with the mud. Tree roots caught ankles. Mosquitoes drilled through sleeves. Diaz snapped at another Marine after the 5th wrong turn. The GPS stuttered, then died. Radios were out. Clouds blocked satellite lock. One man suggested climbing for signal, but the canopy was too thick. Another tried lighting a smoke beacon. Tess stepped forward once, shook her head, and pointed to the wind. The others hesitated. No one asked why. The beacon wasn't lit. They moved through valleys so quiet they could hear their own breath. At one point, the rain started so suddenly it sounded like breaking glass. The squad huddled under a half-collapsed tarp, but Tess stayed outside, face tilted up, watching how the water tracked down the bark and pooled near the root lines. Later, she used a torn poncho to build a catch, tying it between 2 trunks at an angle, low enough to avoid flash glint. She didn't tell them what it was. By dusk, it was half full. Morale frayed faster than their socks. One Marine kicked a pack into a creek. Another threw up from dehydration. No one trusted the food rations left after the drop. They ate only once on the 3rd day. Boiled leaves and a packet of salt scavenged from someone's MRE kit. Tess ate last. She tied a bootlace for the man who'd thrown up, fixing the tension in his harness while he slept. She started drawing in the dirt each morning. At first, they thought it was nothing, but the marks began to mirror the shape of the ridgeline behind them. Not precise, not cartographic, but true, curved where water pooled, notched where the slope dropped. When the light hit it, just right, the image made sense. She didn't ask them to look. She just knelt there, silent, and mapped. On the 4th morning, Diaz tried to rally them with a new plan. He gestured vaguely east and said it would loop them back toward the extraction window. No one argued, but no one moved either. The group was tired, blistered, and short on patience. One man muttered that they were walking in circles. Another said they should just fire 3 rounds and wait. Tess didn't respond to either. She knelt again by her crude map and pointed to a corner of it one not yet walked. No one followed her finger. They shouldered their packs and kept moving east. Tess followed, silent, still 3rd in file. The 4th day opened with cloud cover so low it felt like walking inside breath. The squad didn't talk much, just moved. Step, check, wait, repeat. Someone developed a rash down one side. Another's boots began peeling. Tess scavenged a wrap from her own pack, cutting it into strips. She didn't offer advice. She just fixed what failed. They reached a clearing late that afternoon. Flattened grass, discarded ration pouches, burn marks still faint near a tree line. A smoke trail had been spotted from that direction earlier in the day. The youngest Marine said it must be another squad. Maybe a landing marker, maybe evac. He looked to Diaz, who hesitated, then nodded. The group shifted that way. Packs lifted, weapons slung tight. Tess didn't follow. She knelt once, touched a scorch mark, and looked up at the slope. The smoke was wrong. No heat signature on the breeze, no echo in the trees. The wind was shifting up valley, and there was no gear drag in the mud, no boot prints, no scatter, just a line of smoke with no source. She walked ahead of them and stopped just short of the trees. The signal was faint now. Her fingers brushed the inside of her collar, where she had taped part of the old map back together. The trail they were following wasn't evac. It was a trap. Diaz called out. He asked if she saw something. Tess didn't speak. She raised one hand, palm flat, not fast, not panicked, just steady. The squad paused. No one moved for a long moment. Then someone spoke. Let's check ridge instead. No one argued. They turned back uphill, boots dragging, sweat running dark lines through the dust on every face. Only one Marine looked back at her, the same one whose harness she'd fixed. He didn't say anything, just nodded once, and kept walking. By the 5th day, the squad didn't even pretend they were holding it together. Their uniforms were soaked through from repeated storms and half-dried under shelter. Their sleeves were stiff with salt from evaporated sweat. One Marine limped with every step, jaw tight, ignoring the redness climbing up from a torn heel. Another stopped speaking entirely. He sat with his head in his hands whenever they halted, rocking slightly, lost in some internal loop that no one dared interrupt. Tess never asked for rest. She just took the last shift. Always. When others dropped into sleep the second the fire was smothered, she stayed seated with her back to a tree, eyes open, listening. The jungle never stopped breathing. Branches cracked far off. Frogs chirped. Leaves shifted above her head with the kind of wind that didn't register at ground level. Once, during a stretch of silence too long to feel natural, she rose slowly and walked 20 paces west. No weapon drawn. No light. She paused near a rock outcrop and adjusted a tripwire someone had failed to reset. Then she knelt. She didn't speak, but she didn't return to the tree line until the breeze shifted. They never knew what passed by them that night, but no one was woken. And in the morning, the sergeant looked at her longer than usual before giving the next movement order. He didn't say anything, but he scanned the terrain the same direction she had walked. While the others checked their boots or dug through soggy packs for calories, Tess was already stripping a low branch into points with a dull knife. She used the shelter tarp's fraying edge to bind the wood into tight stakes. No one asked what for. When rain came again, she dug shallow trenches with a folding entrenching tool and pressed the stakes in a line along the back slope, away from their shelter. One of the newer Marines started mimicking her without thinking. When she knelt to check the water catch, he watched her hands and then began cutting notches in his own tarp at the same angle. Later, when she used her shirt cuff to quiet the sound of a loose metal buckle on her vest, he did the same. He never asked, but he watched her differently now. The squad's fire had been cold for 2 days. They stopped trying to boil water. It wasn't worth the signal risk. Tess set up a fireless cook corner, using packets of dry rice soaked in water she collected under leaf folds. She added salt, then set the packets on warm stones to heat slightly. No one thanked her, but someone ate too. Each evening, after the minimal meal was passed around, Tess unwrapped a square of fabric from her pocket and removed a stub of charcoal. She used it to mark the inside of her poncho liner, which she had flattened against the shelter wall. No one saw her do it at first. The lines looked like nonsense, curved smudges and tiny dots in rows. But the younger Marine recognized the shape of the ridgeline from their 3rd day, the slope where the smoke trail had appeared. The map wasn't precise. It didn't need to be. It told her where the light had changed, where the wind shifted. She kept marking. One night, Diaz stumbled back from a perimeter check with blood on his sleeve, just a scrape from a thorn vine, but the pain made him snap. He kicked his own gear, shouted into the dark, then slumped against the wet roots. No one spoke. Tess stepped into the cleared space and picked up the tarp he had thrown. She shook the mud from it, retied the corner loop, and stretched it overhead again. Then she sat beside the pack, arms across her knees, waiting for him to breathe evenly. He didn't thank her. But the next day, when he called for rest, he let her choose the stopping point. They were 3 valleys beyond their last confirmed marker. The canopy had grown higher, the underbrush thicker, but the light through the branches felt different. It came in shafts now, not scatter. Tess noticed it before the rest. She paused near a twisted section of trail that bent uphill and tilted her face to the side. The breeze was rising. It came from above, not strong, but clean, the kind of airflow that suggested an open ridge not far ahead, the kind of airflow you could build a signal from. She didn't call it out. She didn't explain. She just tapped the base of the nearest tree with the heel of her boot, then drew one more line with her charcoal stub across the map square on her poncho. It was a single arc, marked in 3 strokes, not labeled, not bold. But it meant elevation, and Tess was already turning her boots toward it. The flood came just before dusk, a crack of distant thunder, a rush of pressure, and then the stream below their shelter exploded in volume. They had tied the ration sack to a branch fork, high and off the trail, but the current rose faster than anyone expected. In less than 1 minute, it was gone. All of it. The last sealed packets, the salt tabs, the compact burner swept downstream in the brown surge like trash. Roach cursed and threw his gloves. Diaz shouted at no one. The others stood there, soaked, watching the water carry away what had anchored their hope. One Marine, face pale and hollow-eyed, snapped. He grabbed his vest and pack, shouted something about finding the coast, and started walking west into the brush without gear clipped down. He didn't respond to anyone calling after him. He vanished fast in the rain. No one went after him, except Tess. She didn't run. She just stepped into the green, tracking the direction he'd taken with eyes alone. She followed mud prints that had already started to vanish. Her boots moved with patience. The others waited, tense and angry, muttering about letting him go. The sergeant said nothing. 20 minutes later, they returned. She walked in front. He walked behind. Shoulders slumped, lips tight. His chest heaved with guilt and shame, but he said nothing. Tess didn't push or pull him. She had found him by a split tree trunk, sitting with his head against the bark like he'd been trying to disappear. She didn't yell, didn't lecture. She offered a hand. That was all. The fireless cook tarp had blown halfway loose. She tied it back. No one stopped her. That night, they didn't eat. They sat in a hollow dug between the roots of a leaning tree, trying to stay dry. The wind had changed. It curled upward through the trees. Tess listened to it for a long time, then stood and shouldered her gear. She didn't explain. She looked at Diaz and said one word. Elevation. He blinked at her, then nodded once. They moved. The climb was slow. Every muscle ached. The path narrowed into steep switchbacks covered in rotting leaves and hidden stones. One man slipped and caught his ankle. Tess bound it with rope from her own pack. Another tore his sleeve on a thorn vine. She cut the thread away, in silence. No one asked how she knew where to step. They just watched her move and followed one at a time. At the top, they found a clearing half covered in mist. Trees broke around the edge. The air thinned just enough to breathe without choking on wet leaves. It wasn't much, but it was open sky. Tess set down her gear and scanned the cloud layer. It shifted, low and steady. Not clearing, but thinner than before. She unpacked tinder from a sealed pouch. It was dry, wrapped in a wax cloth she had tucked into the base of her kit days earlier. She knelt and began arranging it into a tight bundle with slow, practiced hands. One man asked what the point was. "There's no one looking," he said. "Even if they see smoke, they won't believe it's real. They'll call it runoff from a brush line." Tess didn't answer. She just built. Her fingers moved with calm precision. Frayed rope, shaved bark, a matchstick pulled from a waterproof tube, struck once against a carbon strip, then shielded with both hands until the tiny flame caught and flared orange against her palms. It almost died twice. She waited each time, then fed it more air. When the twigs caught, she lowered it gently to the kindling. The fire smoked at first, then crackled low, a faint red pulse against the green. She kept building. The others stood in silence, watching the flame grow. It was still too small to see from above, still too wet to burn hot. But it gave off light, real light, firelight against the fog, flickering on their exhausted faces. Diaz stepped forward. He knelt beside her and placed a few dry leaves in her reach. She nodded once. No words exchanged. One Marine removed his jacket and held it near the flame, not to dry it, just to warm his hands. The panic had left his face. He looked at her like he finally understood what he'd missed. Tess didn't stop. She fed the flame with exact rhythm, building it outward and up until the center glowed steady. The heat rose in faint waves. The smoke coiled into a darker thread against the lighter mist. She reached into her pack and checked the flare still sealed inside. She didn't open it. Not yet. She tucked it back under the tarp and adjusted the angle of the stones around the fire base. No one told her to stop. No one told her to lead. But no one questioned her anymore. They watched her feed the fire with the last scraps of tinder, hands blackened, knees soaked, hair stuck to her cheeks, eyes locked on the sky she still couldn't see. No one believed the flame would matter, not until they saw her keep it going anyway. And by then, they were too tired to doubt her. The morning came slowly. Gray light seeped through the mist with no warmth, no promise. The fire Tess had built was down to coals. Damp smoke rose from the blackened center, curling sideways in a sluggish drift. No one spoke. They sat in a circle that had lost its shape overnight. Shoulders hunched, knees drawn up. Their packs were half loosened, boots streaked with mud and ash. Nothing had changed. No signal, no airlift. Just cold, wet sky. One Marine asked what time it was, voice thin. Another said it didn't matter. Tess sat apart, facing the open slope. Her face was still, her sleeves stained past the elbows. She wiped one palm down the side of her leg and reached into her pack. The movement was slow, deliberate. She withdrew the last flare. Red tube, sealed cap. The only one she hadn't used? No one told her to do it. No one asked. She stepped into the clearing. The others didn't rise. They just watched as she stood tall on the ridge, boots planted wide in the mud. She cracked the flare open with both hands, struck the cap, and raised it high above her shoulder. The red light burst to life with a hiss, casting a harsh glow over her face and arms. Smoke poured upward in a thick spiral. It lit her in crimson, caught the edge of her braid, and painted a harsh shadow across the clearing. The squad didn't cheer, they didn't speak, they just watched. The flare flickered once. The flame dimmed briefly, caught wind, then rose again. Tess didn't move. She kept her arm locked. The smoke wavered but held. Behind her, the fire pit gave a soft hiss as the last ember faded to black. Roach turned to look at Diaz. Neither man said a word. The minutes stretched. The flare shrank slowly in her hand. Its tip glowed molten red, throwing sparks into the mist. Tess didn't blink. Her grip never dropped. The heat curled up her sleeve, but she held it steady, arm high and straight. A faint thump reached their ears. Then another, low at first, almost imagined. Then it came again, louder, steadier. The rhythm of rotors, the kind that vibrates in the lungs before the ears catch it. A helicopter, not close, not fast, but real. The sound grew. The squad looked up at once. Heads turned. Someone shielded his eyes. A chopper emerged from the fog, low and off course, banking left along a ridgeline they hadn't mapped. Its color was dull under the cloud. No markings visible. It didn't slow. They watched it pass without shifting. Tess stayed still. The flare in her hand flared once more, casting a bright ring of light around her boots. She stepped forward one pace into the open. No wave, no shout, just presence. Red smoke curling off her shoulders like a flag without wind. The helicopter kept moving. Then its nose tipped. It slowed. It circled wide, banking into a turn. The sound of the blades rose sharply. The body swung wide and began descending toward the ridge. The squad didn't shout. No one stood up. They just stared at her. The flare sputtered once, then died in a snap of heat and smoke. Tess lowered her arms slowly. She didn't move until the wind from the rotors reached her knees. The bird came in heavy. Side door open. The crew chief signaled with one hand. Diaz rose first, then turned to help Roach. Tess moved to the edge of the path and helped secure the gear. She loaded the injured Marine second. The man who had tried to leave on the fourth day was helped in next. She kept her hands moving. She never stepped toward the rope, not until the others were already clipped in. The crew chief called her forward. She nodded once and stepped to the hook-in line. No one offered a hand. She didn't need it. She climbed without hesitation, boots finding the grip rungs without slip, hands calm on the metal, gear tight to her vest. Inside the cabin, no one spoke. The sound of the rotors drowned thought, but the way they looked at her had changed. Not with surprise, not with relief. With recognition? As the helicopter lifted, the ridge fell away beneath them. The clearing shrank to a red smear of ash and footprints. The coals they'd left were cold. The tree line blurred behind the haze. The jungle faded below. Just layers of green and silence. No one called her name. They didn't have to. They had followed her. They would remember. The helicopter touched down just after sunrise. Its skids hit hard on the rear pad behind the logistics hangar, rotor wash kicking dust and wrapper scraps across the concrete. The medical crew was already moving before the blades stopped. A team of corpsmen jogged in with stretchers and supply kits, radios clipped high, voices sharp. They called out numbers, triage priorities, vitals. One started to wave for the stretcher, but no one had collapsed. All 5 walked off under their own power. Roach limped but waved off the brace. The Marine with the torn ankle walked slow, steady. Tess moved last, her pack still on, her steps measured and sure. Her boots left trails of hardened mud on the spotless pavement. Inside the debrief tent, officers clustered around a tablet. They had the op file open, the terrain render glowing blue and white under the strip lights. The words, "Signal lost," blinked in one corner. A lieutenant turned as they entered. Who led the fallback? None of the squad answered right away. The officers waited. Another asked what happened to the scheduled extraction. They got silence in return. Finally, the youngest Marine looked toward Tess. She never stopped moving. The words fell flat into the quiet. The lieutenant tried again, gentler this time. What unit is she attached to? Diaz stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture. Doesn't matter, she's ours now. Tess said nothing. She unclipped her vest slowly, fingers precise. Her hands were stained, the creases still packed with grit. She pulled out the flare, the one she hadn't used, and placed it on the table next to the unused radio. The silence in the tent held. A junior clerk stepped around with a logbook and stylus. He asked for names and call signs, one by one. The Marines gave them. When it came to Tess, the clerk glanced at the roster. Her name wasn't on it. There was a line where her entry should have been, blank, except for a smudge near the edge. He looked up at her, pen raised. She didn't speak. She reached into her pack and pulled out the folded terrain map, the one she'd marked by hand, edge to edge, with wind paths and elevation notes. She placed it flat on the table, next to the flare. Then she stepped back. The clerk hesitated, then wrote her name in under field asset attached. No one corrected him. The medtechs returned with hydration packs and protein bars. The squad took them in silence. Tess unstrapped her knee brace but kept her boots on. The jungle mud had dried into thick layers, crusted across the laces and the soles. She made no move to clean them. Outside the tent, one of the maintenance crews paused as the squad passed by. He saw the way the others walked near her now, not ahead, not behind, just beside. No one spoke, but their posture had changed. They reached the quartermaster's table. Tess placed her field gear in a quiet pile. Rope, canteen, spare matches, and the laminated fire catch sheet. She said nothing. The supply officer glanced up but didn't stop her. Diaz lingered last. He didn't salute. He just nodded once. Before they left the tent, the logbook was updated. The mission line was moved from incomplete to exfil completed. Another line was typed in below, smaller, under the field remarks column. Unit intact. Code line 3rd Squad never broke. She never asked for rank. Never needed to be called leader. She simply kept going when no one else could. Through mud, silence, and doubt, Tess carried more than her own weight. She carried the fire, the map, and the belief that doing the right thing doesn't need an audience. In a world where strength is often loud and visible, hers was quiet, grounded, and earned. She didn't speak to be counted. She stood, moved, and endured until others followed. And in the end, they did. If you've ever felt overlooked, if you've ever kept going when no one noticed, this story is for you. Take a moment to reflect on the strength you carry that no one sees. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if these stories resonate with you, follow for more quiet, powerful moments that remind us what resilience really looks like.